Francis rose to power, he promised to fight corruption and money laundering in the Vatican Bank, which has been plagued by internal power struggles over its murky finances for decades. Corruption is nothing new in the Vatican. In fact, as late as last year, the city-state was rocked by the largest criminal trial in its modern history. The case involved a London real estate deal that dates back to 2014, when the Vatican state invested initially around $415 million, much of it from church donations, into a fund operated by two Italian investment bankers, Raffaele Mincione and Gianluigi Torzi. The incident made clear how poorly the Vatican's monsignors were handling its finances because of how it was allegedly defrauded of millions in fees by the Italian brokers, including some Vatican officials. They allegedly demanded $15 million from the Vatican in exchange for complete ownership of the property. The Vatican soon realized they would suffer enormous losses and never be able to recoup their investment. Other individuals were brought in to salvage a situation that would only take a turn for the worse. The building's ownership was never transferred to the Vatican. That's according to the prosecutors who have accused Mr. Torzi of extortion, embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. Pope Francis changed its criminal code, abolishing privileges for cardinals and bishops so that they too would be subject to the law if accused of misconduct. This case brought a lot of attention to the Vatican's vast wealth. The Vatican's wealth is estimated to be worth between $10 billion and $15 billion by bankers. This is true even though it is the smallest country in the world, measuring a little over 100 acres, or 1/8 the size of Central Park in New York. It has significant investments in the financial sector, as well as in insurance, steel, chemicals, and real estate. The majority of the real estate holdings are in Italy and are either rented out or utilized by religious organizations. It purportedly also owns more than 1,000 homes and locations outside of Italy, including London, Geneva, Paris, and others. But how does this city-state with a population of about 600 people make all this money? In this video, we will tell you how the Vatican became one of the largest landowners in Europe and its history of scandals involving corruption, murder, and financial mismanagement. Welcome to another project. In order to understand how the Vatican has been able to consolidate so much power and wealth over the years, you need to understand its modern history. Italy's history is intertwined with that of the Vatican and predates the spread of Christianity in Europe. King Victor Emmanuel II started unifying all of Italy under one rule in 1850. He would rule as the country of Italy's first monarch. The Papal States, which included the majority of the present Italian regions of Lazio, including Rome, March, Umbria, and Romagna, as well as parts of Emilia, were the largest states and the last to refuse to become a part of a unified Italy. The Papal States were gradually absorbed by the king until only Rome remained. He waited until 1870 before sending his army to occupy Rome forcibly. Pope Pius IX was presented with a number of concessions by the king in exchange for his recognition of the new Italian state and consent to the annexation of the Papal States. The deal did not grant the Holy See, which is the universal government of the Catholic Church, complete control over the church and the remaining physical area. Therefore, the Pope refused it. For 59 years, Pope Pius IX and his successors lived alone in the Vatican and referred to themselves as prisoners of the Vatican. The Italian government's authority over the Papal States was not recognized by them. This became known as the Roman Question. The Vatican had already lost significant land holdings and assets. Around this time, Pope Pius IX began to encourage a revival of Peter's Pence throughout the Catholic world. Peter's Pence gets its name from an English tradition that King Alfred the Great established in the 9th century by collecting money from landowners to support the Pope. Fees for marriages, burials, and confirmations brought in additional funds. Special taxes for the Crusades were also collected in the early Peter's Pence collections. Over the ages, the practice became less common, notably following the French Revolution, when the papacy's political fortunes were at their lowest point. The collection, known in Italian as Aballo di San Pietro, or Offerings from the Faithful, was intended to cover both charitable donations and the Vatican's ongoing operating costs. An author named Gerald Posner presents a harsh critique of the Pope's intentions and strategies behind the revival of the fund in God's Bankers, a history of money and power at the Vatican. He writes, "Not only did Pius need money to survive, but the Church also required a professional army to protect what little it had left after the loss of the Papal States. The poor and uneducated were induced to donate by tales that Italian inquisitors had chained the Pope to a prison wall. One fraud even sold samples of holy straw from the non-existent cell's floor. Catholics in different countries competed with one another to see who could raise the most. The Pope would also send signed photos, titles, and blessings to the largest donors. Pope Leo XIII started investing Peter's pence in Roman real estate in the 1880s to generate a greater return. This was successful in balancing the Vatican's finances. The annual collection increased to $67 million in 1992, and it became more lucrative than ever. In other words, the success of Peter's pence has been influenced by both economic factors and popular perceptions of the papacy, which is a concerning sign for the Vatican given the constant scandals around financial mismanagement. But how does Peter's pence work today? Catholics all across the world are urged to pay generously to a philanthropic appeal to the Vatican each year. Foundations, individual benefactors, and religious organizations make contributions. The Peter's pence may be used by the Pope in any manner that advances his ministry, as permitted by church law. More than 65% of the funds come from the Peter's pence collection that dioceses send in each year on or around the feast day of Saints Peter and Paul, June 29th. As previously reported by the Vatican's Economic Secretariat, $4 to $5 million were earned by Peter's pence in 2020. Although the Vatican promotes the donations as going to the impoverished and suffering, a Wall Street Journal study in 2019 showed that just 10% of the more than $52 million donated annually actually benefit people in need. The majority of the remainder goes toward reducing the Vatican's expanding budget deficit, which doubled to more than $73 million in 2018 alone. Pope Francis might be the first pope in a long time to criticize Vice President Pence's policies. He condemned the nouveau riche mentality, a culture of self-indulgence and carelessness about expenditures that ate up revenue from Peter's pence, which was meant to be used for the Pope to help the needy, not to close budget gaps. It's necessary to establish the differences between Vatican City and the Holy See in order to fully understand the complex economics of the Vatican. The country's executive branch is the Holy See. In most situations, you would enter into a contract with the Holy See if you wanted to do business with the region. The Holy See's official residence is in Vatican City. It generates revenue from Peter's pence through interest and investments of its reserves. The Holy See has historically focused its investments on Italian businesses, diversifying its portfolio across stocks and bonds and keeping its ownership in individual companies to less than 6%. Investments in the developing world are limited as a result of its cautious approach to investing, which involved opting to buy and hold established businesses in robust industries. However, more recent investments have been more global, with some activity on the New York Stock Exchange, particularly in bonds and currencies of Western Europe. The Holy See also has stakes in real estate, mainly in land and churches all over the world. It will not, however, invest in all things. For instance, it won't invest in businesses that oppose church principles, such as pharmaceutical firms that produce birth control. The Holy See's investment practices are comparable to those of others who follow a faith-based investing philosophy in this regard. Vatican City, in contrast to the Holy See, derives its income from more conventional, stately businesses. The city, which has a labor force of roughly 4,800, depends on a few tiny companies to make money. Millions of visitors and pious pilgrims visit the city each year, in addition to the Sistine Chapel, St. Peter's Basilica, and the Vatican museums. The sale of books, tours, highly sought-after stamps and coins, and museum admissions all bring in money for the city. The prefect of the Secretariat for the Economy, Juan Guerrero, a Spanish Jesuit, reported operational income of $823 million in 2022. Perhaps the most contentious and poorly understood aspect of the Vatican's economics is the position of the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank, also referred to as the Institute for the Works of Religion, is a private bank with headquarters in Vatican City that was established in 1942 by Pope Pius XII. The bank exclusively takes deposits from high church leaders and organizations. The bank has frequently been referred to as the most secret bank in the world because of how little is known about its regular business operations and transactions. A medieval tower that was formerly a dungeon now houses the Vatican Bank. There are no windows on the lower floors. You must exit Italy and enter the Vatican through the Porta Sant'Anna gate in order to be admitted. The Vatican Bank should arguably be held to the highest moral standards in how it does business more than any other organization. Nevertheless, despite its connections to saints, the bank that represents the Catholic Church has built a reputation over the past few decades for corruption, controversy, and poor management. The bank has been implicated in numerous heinous crimes, including murder, bribery, mysterious deaths, money laundering, and many others. But when Pope Francis took office as the Catholic Church's head in early 2013, he made it known that one of his priorities was to change how the Vatican Bank is administered, bringing about a series of reforms that would reestablish faith and trust in the Church's financial arm. But it was always going to be challenging to implement changes at such a closed-off institution, and similar efforts to do so have failed in the past. For example, numerous conspiracies theorized that Pope John Paul's desire to streamline the operations of the Vatican Bank may have had a role in his death in 1978, which appeared to be the result of unexplained circumstances. A few years later, the scandal worsened when, in the early 1980s, Banco Ambrosiano, a bank it owned a majority share in, made headlines for all the wrong reasons. Its leaders were suspected to have transferred cash out of the tiny nation into dubious foreign banks and to have ties to a group called Propaganda Do, an illicit Masonic lodge which had connections to the mafia. Founded in 1877, this organization was affiliated with the Grand Orient of Italy, and after its Masonic charter was revoked in 1976, it underwent a clandestine transformation into an extreme right that was anti-communist, anti-Soviet, and anti-leftist. So this was a pretty big deal. Following an investigation into Banco Ambrosiano, its chairman, Roberto Calvi, was detained, tried, and given a 4-year prison term. Following his release on appeal, Calvi left Italy and was later found hanged beneath London's Blackfriars Bridge.
On the 18th of June 1982, the lifeless body of a middle-aged man was seen hanging from a section of scaffolding just above the water under Blackfriars Bridge. The Thames River Police raced to the scene, assuming it was just another routine suicide. A passport in the man's jacket pocket revealed him as Robert Calvi, head of Italy's largest privately owned bank. A month later, an inquest ruled that Calvi had committed suicide. But this was by no means the end of the story. Calvi had disappeared from Italy on the 10th of June after having been found guilty on a major charge of currency smuggling. As chairman of the Banco Ambrosiano, Calvi was known as God's banker when the Vatican became not only a major client, but also one of the bank's most substantial shareholders.
It was a turbulent time in the history of the Catholic Church, and the scandal that served as the inspiration for the third installment of the Godfather trilogy's plot. Long after Calvi was discovered dead, the scandal's aftermath persisted. Several attempts to bring those allegedly at fault to justice failed. Additional suspicions of money laundering later surfaced, and after the Vatican Bank failed to adequately disclose the sources of the 1.8 billion euros deposits, U.S. investment bank J.P. Morgan closed one of the Vatican Bank's accounts. In response, Pope Francis appointed a fresh pontifical commission to research prospective bank reforms, which ultimately resulted in the dismissal of 4 senior cardinals. Which leads us to the question, why do you think the Vatican has struggled to crack down on corruption? And do you think Pope Francis is the man to do it? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and tap the like button if you enjoyed the video.